Mintz. I'm the director of the Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities. I'm also a deputy Title IX coordinator for SDSU, which means that I also work really closely with the issues of sexual assault, sexual violence, things like that. So at the end, if there's any questions about that topic, happy to talk about that a little bit as well. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Makes me happy that I've had the opportunity to work with probably about more than half of you, which I think is a good thing. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. For those of you that know me, you'll know that I'm a relatively informal person. And so if any questions pop up, comments, anything like that, feel free to sort of interrupt me or type something in the chat, because I know sometimes it just doesn't work that well to sort of wait till the very, very end to ask a question about slide 2 or whatever it might be. Slide 2 might just have my name on it. But so let me go ahead and share my screen. That's not what I was hoping to share. Okay, I'm gonna try it one more time. I was telling Jennifer that I was having some pretty significant technology concerns right before. Significant meaning my mouse wasn't working, my mute wasn't working, and my screen was blacking out. So let me try this again. Is that working?
Looks like it. I'm seeing your slide.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. It's not the screen I wanted it to be on, but we're gonna go with that. So, okay. So, again, super excited to be here and spend time with all of you. I really look forward to these opportunities because I think that the Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities, student conduct in general, is, I think, kind of an area that some may put us a little bit in a silo. Or have assumptions about the work that we do, right? Like, so we're the folks that kick students out of school. And that's what people will sort of think of. I think that when you look at even the name of our office, the Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities, right there in the title, what we're showing is that this is not just about, here are the policies and you have to follow the policies, otherwise you're in trouble. And when I kind of go into a little bit more about what happens in our interactions with students, I think you'll see that we are not the disciplinarian office, and a lot goes into our work with students as well as the interactions that we have with students. So I'm just going to start off really quickly. We have a really specific kind of purpose in that we're responsible for acting on behalf of the university president regarding all aspects of student conduct. So what does that mean? That means things that happen in the residence halls. It means things that that university police or San Diego Police Department work with. It means things that happen in the bookstore, academic dishonesty or disruption in classes. Right now, obviously, there's a very heavy focus on enforcing our COVID-19 related policies and protocols. So we work with a lot of different areas on campus. One thing I want to point out is that we're probably one of the few areas on campus that we're not necessarily seeking students to come in and utilize our services. So when we think about other areas and we think about, everything from sort of office hours to student activities to programs in residential education, their goal is really to sort of, how do we get as many students as possible into our area so we can interact with students. Obviously, that's not going to happen when you're talking about student discipline, but it doesn't downplay the types of interactions that we have with students. And when students do wind up sort of coming through our doors or on our Zoom screens, we're very focused on the type of intervention that we have. So in support of the mission of San Diego State, our specific mission is to educate campus community members about the Student Code of Conduct. And probably the most important part is that we assist in the development of students as good citizens. And I'm going to be really honest, sometimes that includes their parents as well. So again, our goal, when you think about sort of a student conduct office, our goal is not actually to remove people from school. It is so hard to get into San Diego State. I know we had over 100,000 applications for the number of spots that we have for the fall semester. So students work really, really hard to get here. And the last thing that we want to do is remove them from the opportunities that they have at San Diego State. So we start really early in letting them know what the expectations are that we have of them. We want them to be good citizens. We want them to be accountable, responsible. We want them to be upstanders instead of bystanders. And we start that even before they get to orientation. So again, because they worked so hard to get here, we want to make sure that they're not losing the opportunity to be here. A lot of times what that means is that we intervene pretty early. So when we talk about maybe some smaller policy violations, maybe that happen in the residence halls, when we intervene and when we even have those conversations, our goal is to say, walk us through what's going on. Is there something we can do to support you in a way that will lead to maybe a change in some critical thinking skills so that ultimately you don't wind up moving through our process and losing the opportunity to be here? There is a great deal of care that we demonstrate with our individual students. We are all, everyone in the office is at least a master's level professional with a focus in student affairs, college student development. And it also means that we have experience coming from, although we are not therapists, we have experience coming from a counseling background. A meeting with a student is not going to be, here's the policy, you violated it, here's your punishment. That is not what the meeting is going to be like, because there is a story behind every specific student. And if our goal ultimately is to help support them as they continue at the university, we want to get to know our students. And through sort of a counseling-based technique, we are able to have students feel a little bit more comfortable opening up to us so we know more about their specific experience and also how we can best support them at the university. Our goal, again, sort of contrary maybe to popular opinion, our goal is actually to increase retention. So again, by stepping in early and doing interventions and also connecting them with other support areas on campus, have a very low rate of recidivism when it comes to students violating policy again, after they've already had an intervention from our office. And that is in part because with our successful sanctions that I'll talk about in our conversations with students, we're able to actually help them decrease their risk behaviors. We are very much aware that we have a really unique opportunity to work with students in ways that maybe other areas on campus don't have. So if you think about even the campus of SDSU, even though we're virtual right now, we definitely recognize that this is a window of opportunity that we have to work with them while they're at SDSU. And if you think about all that happens on campus, around campus, not just in terms of academic and social, but in terms of involvement in organizations, preparing for life after SDSU, we really consider that SDSU is kind of like a lab for life. And students, as they're transitioning and they continue to move through SDSU, they're continuing to sort of work on different skills that they have, which will prepare them to be successful after they leave SDSU. For us, what we see a lot is that they're learning more independently to exercise internal controls without authority figures like their parents taking over, right? So there's not necessarily someone, especially for our on-campus population, who's going to say, do this at this time, you have to do this, make sure you're doing this. And so right from the time they get here, they're learning to exercise their internal controls. The same is true for our students that live off campus, because it's a very different environment when you go from sort of a structured system and routine in high school or to a college environment. Accepting accountability is something that we really do focus on. We work with a lot of students who, they'll sort of say it's everyone's fault, but my own. It's the university's fault, it's my roommate's fault, it's this person's fault. And so if the student truly engaged in a behavior that was not maybe the best decision to make, it's our role to help them understand the importance of taking accountability so that they can then learn from that behavior and not repeat the mistakes that we're making. Toward the end, I'm going to show you some examples of what's come out of this process for our students. And what we've learned is that even though students don't like, I was going to say love, but they probably don't love it, don't like having to go through a student conduct process, and they often don't like being assigned some of the educational stipulations that they have to complete. In the end, there is a change that happens in their behavior. And a lot of times, and I'll show you some examples, they see that change happening and they're able to look back and say, when this process started, I was this person. And now that I've completed everything, even though I didn't like it at the time, this is kind of what I've learned from this experience. One thing that we see a lot, and I don't know if all of you have had a similar experience, but it's interesting to see how sort of the student dynamic is changing. And they're very aware of their rights. I have the right to do this. I have the right to do this, but they aren't always as great as on their corresponding responsibilities. This can start from, I have sent you 97 emails and you haven't responded to any, all the way through the expectation and their responsibilities to treat others with courtesy and respect, to uphold the academic impact of our degree by not engaging in things like academic dishonesty. So it's part of our role to teach them, this is what we expect of you and how can we help you get from point A to point B. Something that's important too is, in my office, we hear a lot of, well, you're getting me in trouble, you're doing this, but I promise you that I don't wake up every morning and say, wow, I really hope that I can suspend someone today. Most mornings, I don't feel that way. Everyone has the occasional morning. But we're not making a choice to intervene with these students. The students, after being told, again, like I said, early on, before they even come to campus, these are the expectations that we have of you. Students make choices and they choose to violate our policies. So again, when we go back to sort of this unique window of opportunity that my team has to work with these students, our goal is to keep them at the university. We make appropriate interventions. And we do use, I know it's sort of a corny term, but we do use teachable moments to help them reflect on that behavior. What we see in a lot of situations is that the power of peers is highest in new or unusual situations. So if we think about our students that are coming to college, whether they're coming to college for the first time or whether they're transferring from another university, no one wants to feel lonely. Loneliness and homesickness are the top two issues that our students face when coming to college, when coming to SDSU. And because of that, those feelings of loneliness and homesickness, they want to feel like they belong. And so sometimes our students are going to do things that they wouldn't necessarily do if they were in a different environment. Acceptance, or the feeling of acceptance and belonging, often comes from our peers. So if students see that their peers are engaging in something, whether it's a great decision or not, they might decide to engage in that same activity because they would rather honestly face some sort of disciplinary consequence than feel isolated from their peers, especially as they're in this new environment. So I'm sure there are a lot of us that have done things in a group that if we looked back on it, we would never do on our own. I think a really simple example is, how many times have we been walking down the street and someone in front of us looks up at the sky? And so we look up at the sky, right? And there's nothing going on in the sky, but we do it because other people are doing it. And so just in that, when we think of sort of our own behavior, it's not uncommon for us to do things because other people are doing it as well. When you combine that with the fact that students are now in this new environment of having more unstructured time than they did previously, this is where some risky behaviors can come into play. So I had a former director of the Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities, who's actually, she has passed on now. She was very into the far side. And sometimes I would find her in her office sitting at her desk, just sort of giggling and laughing to herself because she was just going through the far side. It took me a minute to understand some of the far side comics, but I think I've got a couple of them down. So for example, obviously the reason that you all came to this this lunch meeting today was to learn about the migration patterns of lemmings. I mean, that's really, Jennifer was like, do you want to come and talk about the migration patterns of lemmings? And I was like, absolutely, I'll be there. So here's what's interesting about lemmings. Lemmings, during their migration pattern, they will follow each other into the water. And so you'll see that like the first two little lemmings, these are lemmings, by the way, lemmings, they're diving into the water and all the lemmings behind them are following. The reality of the situation is, I'm sorry to say this, but lemmings can't swim. And so unfortunately, a lot of lemmings are not successful in the migration pattern, right? But it's kind of an example of like, well, everyone else is doing it, so I'm going to do it too. What we hope for our students is that with our partnership with the student, with their parents and support systems, their families, with their faculty, their assistant deans, we're hoping that our students are more like the little lemming in the back that's wearing the life preserver, right? And so our support system that we're putting together at SDSU can kind of serve as that life preserver for students. So here's another example, right? You're on 10 to 1. If I start howling, I'll have everyone here howling inside 5 minutes, just because. So yes, we are in situations where sometimes we're like, what? And we will read a report or we'll get a referral that we're like, I don't understand it. The only way that we're going to understand it and be able to best serve our students is if we have the conversation and say, walk us through what's going on. And again, that conversation is not going to be, okay, here's the alcohol policy. You did this. Here's your consequence. Thank you for playing and have a nice day. We want to know what's going on. What led you? Like, were you aware of this? Walk me through your thought process to let me know what was going on. What was leading to that? There are behaviors that we see. For example, if we talk about maybe a theft from a bookstore, we deal with a fair share of students who are like, I just didn't want to wait in line, right? And that's a certain type of conversation. And then we work with students and we say, tell us what happened. And they're like, well, it's the holidays are coming up. I work 2 jobs. I support my family. And I wanted to bring them something from SDSU because I'm proud to go here, right? So we won't know how to best serve that student until we get to the bottom of sort of what's going on. So we do our best in that setting to try to create connections and relationships so that students know I can open up and talk about what's going on. We do our best to seek it out while also recognizing like, yeah, this person in front of me doesn't really want to be here. So we work really hard at our conversation topics and the way that we ask questions. Everything is driven with the idea of supporting the student as a whole in mind. And sometimes we just have to be like, what's going on? Like, just because other people did this, why did you do it? And then we'll get to know their thought process. There are a lot of issues, and I just gave an example with the bookstore that impact behavior. And I think that it's not on the slide, but we have seen this so much during the last year of how much I think we focused appropriately on. So this is not just about people are now on Zoom, right? We're talking about all the different issues. What if they don't have a private space? What if they don't have access to the internet? We talk about Respondus, and we talk about how students feel about sharing their space and the visual of their space. All of these different things that have shown us how different things in life can affect the behavior of our students. So again, as I mentioned, economics, students have varied level of support. And that's true in terms of cases where, we look at our guardian scholars, we look at other students that just for whatever reason, maybe they don't feel comfortable having the conversations or with their parents about what's going on. I've dealt with a number of students who have said, well, my parents are going through X, Y, and Z, and I didn't want to burden them to also explain what was going on in my life. There are students, to be honest with you, we're working with a student right now whose parent wrote us an email and said, I have been involved in every decision that my daughter has made since she was 5, right? And so sometimes it's like overstepping, and sort of that helicopter lawnmower parent that we've talked about in years past has an impact on how a student is behaving or responding. Sometimes students don't want to be here. It's not their goal to be in college or at SDSU. They were trying to fulfill the wishes of their parents, or they felt forced into it. We don't know the types of communication and relationships that they have with a support system, if it exists off campus. And then also, they may have lost significant relationships. And when we're talking about, our students who maybe had, let's say, a large amount of alcohol, right, and were transported, or they engaged in physical assault or something like that, by asking what's going on and we get to the bottom of it, we realize that this behavior that we saw was caused by some of these other issues, including losing significant relationships with parents. A lot of our students, their parents, they don't want their parents to even know where they are. And so it's various levels, right? There is not a cookie cutter, and I'm glad there isn't, mold of what a student at SDSU looks like. And we adapt to supporting all of those students. I've dealt with a fair number of students who have said, I really don't want to be here and I don't want to tell my parents that, or they won't let me withdraw. So I'm just going to keep getting in trouble until you kick me out. And those are difficult conversations to have as well. These are some of the greatest risk behaviors that we're seeing at SDSU right now. Alcohol and other drugs. That is not unique to SDSU. I think a unique challenge that we have at SDSU is that we have a lot of students who their parents also attended SDSU, and SDSU used to be known as the party school. And so one of the things that we talk about at orientation with the parents is this is not the same SDSU that you went to. And so when you're talking about the stories of how hammered you were and how this and how that, sometimes your student might feel like they need to live up to that same sort of legacy. So that's part of a conversation that we have. In terms of other drugs, as we know, we're a large urban campus, and if it exists at SDSU. We are going through a global pandemic right now, a deadly global pandemic. And so SDSU put a lot of safety measures in place, not just in terms of testing and now vaccinating and things like that, but things that we required our students to do in order to keep themselves and the rest of the campus safe. So we've had a huge number of COVID-19 policy violations. That number is around 2,000 in the last year. We've had about 2,000 students that have violated COVID-related policies. All of those result in a conversation with us to say, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the decisions that you're making. Unfortunately, hazing is an issue at SDSU, just like it is at a lot of other institutions as well. And the idea of sort of that group think, and we work with students to deconstruct what is hazing. Hazing is a term that can be sort of thrown around, but when you think about it, when we ask students, what is your understanding of hazing? They'll say, well, you're not allowed to do this, and you're not allowed to do this, and you're not allowed to do this. And when you break it down and you say hazing is about degradation, hazing is about a person or a group of people telling another group of people, you're not good enough unless you do this. Unless I paddle you, I won't know that you're going to be a good friend in the future. So we deconstruct that a lot with our hazing students. Interpersonal irresponsibility, and then obviously academic dishonesty. The value of the SDSU degree is so important. And if students are permitted to cheat or plagiarize their way through SDSU, purchase essays, go on Chegg and copy different things, it's going to ultimately result in sort of the devaluation of the SDSU degree. So we do meet with a lot of students for academic dishonesty as well. Interpersonal relationships and boundaries, that is something that students are learning while they're in the college environment, because a lot of students have never lived with someone else other than someone in their family. A lot of them have never shared a room. A lot of them have never had to figure out off-campus living assignments with roommates and things like that. And so it's a learned skill, and we have to recognize that all of our students are coming from all of their different family dynamics and their cultures and their mini cultures. So for example, and Randy Tim, our Dean of Students, he and I are fortunate enough to present to the parents like 19 times during orientation. Some of you are very familiar with presenting the same thing 19 times during orientation. And Randy tells a story of how when he was growing up, if he forgot to do something, he would come home to a note, and that note would say, Randy, you forgot to take out the trash, do it before your dad gets home, or whatever that was, note, right? He grew up in Iowa. My parents were both from New York. And so the communication, I never got a note, right? Like I learned a lot of words that I wasn't supposed to learn, had to unlearn them. And then I learned it again later on in life. Because we all have a bad day, right? And so we talk about like some people now, especially with text, we've had roommates get involved in situations where they're in the same room and they're texting each other. And so students don't necessarily know how to communicate, how to have conversations, how to have a conversation with faculty about expectations. If I do this, would this be considered against policy? Things like that. And I think that started, my theory is that all started with headphones, because we started to see our students walking around. They had a minute and a half between class and they put their headphones on. And so that immediately started to limit the communication, because you're not going to say hi to someone that's wearing headphones, right? And then text and email, text, all of that stuff. So we are trying to help our students learn how to appropriately communicate. And that doesn't always mean email or a text message. It doesn't mean writing emails to your professors that look like text messages, right? And so we're trying to help in terms of their communication skills, and then their problem solving styles may be different. Again, we talk about Randy getting a note. There are some students who their family culture was, we're going to yell at each other until one person sort of gives in. So when you think about all of these students coming from these different backgrounds and cultures and various levels of support, and now they're all coming to SDSU and they're learning to live together and work with faculty and work with expectations, in some ways, it could be considered a little bit of a perfect storm. So we like to consider ourselves a resource, just like all of you are with our students, just like counseling and psychological services, just like all of our cultural centers, trying to figure out how do we best tap into our students. The way that we do that is through student conduct. So obviously, as I said earlier, a major concern is academic dishonesty, and students come to SDSU with different levels of academic preparation. Work at SDSU is harder than it was in high school. And we've had a lot of students that were like, I was a 4.2 in high school, and then I got to SDSU and I was looking at a 2.2 or whatever it might be. The way to write a paper, an essay, to take a quiz is very different. And so sometimes that type of pressure to succeed is going to lead to cheating or plagiarism, purchasing essays. We've had students that have tried to bribe professors or TAs. And it's because of this tremendous pressure to succeed. Usually that pressure is coming from the students themselves. It can be connected to parents. It could be my parents want me to go into this field. I have to get this. Impacted majors, all of that. And so we're trying to work with our students so that they understand ahead of time. And again, we started orientation. Make sure that you understand the expectations of your professors. For one professor, it is completely okay for you to work in groups outside of class. For another professor, they are going to consider that cheating. Some professors will accept a paper that you wrote for another class if it's on a similar topic. Some are going to say, unless you cite yourself, I'm submitting you for academic dishonesty. The other thing is that professors do vary widely in their instructions. There are some faculty who, first day of class, we're going to talk about how to properly cite. We're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about that. Some professors are like, you've gone through high school, you should already know this, right? No strategy is right or wrong, but it's definitely when you, again, you combine all of that together, some students may choose to engage in academic dishonesty. Something that's important to know that I don't think all faculty know, and we work really hard, we work really closely with Joanna Brooks and faculty affairs to make sure that people are aware of this. Faculty are actually mandated through an executive order. There's a lot of executive orders in the CSU system. Executive Order 1098 is the executive order that tells us how to run judicial procedures and student conduct procedures. And faculty are mandated to report every instance of academic dishonesty to the Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities. Here's why this is challenging. And this is also why I appreciate these opportunities to say, here's who we are, here's what we do, this is what it will look like. I think a lot of times faculty say, I don't want to ruin their life by referring them to student rights and responsibilities. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know those folks. If their goal is to kick people out of school, I don't know what's going to happen. I think it was a one-off. I've addressed it with the student and I feel good about it. But what faculty don't necessarily realize, number one, they don't know the type of intervention and conversations that we're going to have with students, and that it's not just going to be like, okay, see this, you can't copy from the internet anymore, you're suspended. It's not going to be like that. But faculty also sort of have a glimpse into that student's behavior. And so what we found is that there have been a lot of instances where a faculty member might decide, okay, I'm not going to refer them, I think I've covered it. But what they don't have access to is, well, they also cheated in this class and another class, and a year ago, they bought a paper. And so I recognize that there kind of has to be a lot of trust between us. But the reason that the faculty are mandated to do this is because we have a bigger picture of sort of what that student's behavior is. And we will know and sanction appropriately if this is an isolated incident, if it's a one-off, if it's, I just forgot that I was supposed to do the citation this way, versus if it's happened in multiple classes, if it's, we have seen dissertations completely plagiarized, right? And so it's important that we work together to know that. By understanding what we do in student rights and responsibilities, I want faculty to ask questions. I want them to know that this is our process. Once you refer this student, this is the treatment that student can expect. The other thing that's interesting about SDSU is, per Senate policy, what we do in the Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities is completely different than what the faculty member can do in response to academic dishonesty. So there's two tracks. If a faculty member discovers that academic dishonesty has occurred, they can do what they feel is appropriate in terms of the student grades. That can range anywhere from, depending on sort of departmental policy expectations, I'm gonna mark this certain percentage off of this exam. I'm going to give them a 0 on the exam. I'm going to give them a 0 for the class. That is all completely independent of what my office does. in terms of sanctioning. So it doesn't take away the ability for the faculty to say, academically, this is what I feel is the appropriate consequence. But by looking at the biggest picture, and then also by us, the more information we know about a student, the better we know how to support them and help them. So if there's plagiarism issues or citation issues, and we've seen it happen a couple of times, how do we best support this student so they don't resort to engaging in academic dishonesty? So I've kind of mentioned it, right? So we have a kind of a tricky role in student rights and responsibilities because we have the California Administrative Code and Student Conduct. We have all the policies of SDSU. We have policies in San Diego. We have laws, and we're trying to facilitate student development, which is why it's so important for us to do the best job we can in the team of CSRR to make those connections with students. This is not a process like court. It's not surprise, we have witnesses, and this is why I'm coming to this decision. We want to answer any and all questions that a student has and support them. It's not, I have hidden information that I'm going to spring on you. We want to let them know this is what we're working with. Tell us how you feel about this. And every student has the opportunity to speak with the judicial officer to say, here's my perspective, here's what happened, here's what's going on that may have led to that. So again, just a quick blurb on the screen here. These are all the different legal mandates that we have to abide by when making decisions. And sometimes I think it can be tricky because sometimes folks don't agree with our decisions, the students, the parents, the faculty, other administrators. And I think sometimes it's not necessarily known that we have to make sure that we're abiding by all of these different things. We're looking at the student, but we also have to look out for the wellness, well-being and health of other members of the campus community, of the surrounding community. We have neighbors that have been neighbors to the SDSU campus for a really, really long time. And so we're trying to facilitate all of that while abiding by laws and executive orders and policies and due process, and fitting in hearing from the person that was maybe harmed by the behavior, as well as facilitating the best support system that we can for students as well. Okay, here's a real quick flow chart if anyone has any questions. But basically what this colorful flow chart says is that anytime that my office is told about some sort of violation, any type of violation that I mentioned from the beginning, we send a letter to the student and we say, here's the allegation, come in and talk to us. Because that way we can make the most informed decision. We talk to a student, if we say, there's not evidence to show that you violated policy, we are more than happy to say, thank you for meeting with us. I enjoyed this conversation. No action is being taken. If we do find a student responsible, then what we do is we send them basically the decision. And the student has a period of time to say, I agree or I disagree. So when we talk about something like suspension, probations, expulsion, ours is not a process that just says, Lee, I'm Lee, I've made my decision, here you go, it goes into effect, you're now suspended. Every student has a right to say, I don't think this is fair, and then the process can continue to sort of like an appeals level. And I won't go into detail about that, but please know that is that for me, I encourage students anytime they don't understand or agree with the decision to come forward and ask questions. What do you think is fair? Why do you think this is not fair? Now that we've already discussed this and you've seen this tentative outcome, do you have more information that would help me make an even more accurate decision? The worst thing for me to hear is, well, I just signed it because I just thought there's no point. There is a point. And so as you're working with students and students are like, I don't agree, I don't think it's fair, but I'm going to sign it to get it out of the way. Please encourage them to contact us again if they have any questions or concerns about the decision that they're making. That basically sums up this chart. Our standard of proof is different than the legal system. So our standard of proof that is pointed out in that pesky executive order that I mentioned before, we have to use something called a preponderance of the evidence. In court, on TV, they talk a lot about beyond a reasonable doubt, but the standard of proof in our administrative conduct process is basically more likely than not. if a reasonable person looking at all the information that's been gathered would say, it's more likely than not that the student violated policy, we have to hold them accountable for violating policy. So we do spend a lot of time with students and parents saying, nope, this is not the legal system. This is not court. This is not this, to get them to understand our process. You can talk to us. You can call us as many times as you want and ask questions. That's not going to count against you or anything like that. But that is the standard of proof that will tell us sort of, do we hold the student responsible or not? We have a bunch of different, I know I'm just about out of time, but we have a bunch of different potential consequences. Anywhere from a warning, which is pretty much thanks for the conversation. I think that the type of violation is minor. So I'm going to give you a warning. It doesn't appear on the transcript. It's not going to appear in some background check, things like that, all the way up to expulsion. What can lead to a student getting expelled at SDSU? Sexual assault, drug sales, weapons, physical assaults, hazing, things like that, right? Also, what I want you to be aware of is that our letters, when we send a letter out to a student, if a student ever comes to you and says, look at this letter, we are required to include certain things in that initial notice that we send to students. So for any type of violation, we are required by the CSU to say, here's the range. It can range from a warning up to expulsion. I don't like doing that. I don't want people to think I'm facing expulsion for violating the noise policy, but that is something we're required to include. So again, conversations like that, students come to you, they're nervous, they're scared about what this might mean, point them back to us and we will explain that. And these are some of the sample stipulations. So again, it's not very effective if we just sort of say to a student, here, you're on probation for a year. So what we try to do is include, in probably about 99% of our cases, we include an educational stipulation as well that's going to help them reflect. It's going to connect them to resources that are important on campus, and how do we help them make better decisions in the future. This is what we consider when making a decision. I know I'm sort of flying through these right now, but we look at the standard campus practice. It is very important that we are consistent with our students, at the same time recognizing that every student situation is different. And we do take those circumstances into account when we're making any decision, but it's also important that we're treating our students fairly. The severity of the violation, right? If someone violates a noise policy versus, someone has threatened to bring a gun to one of the residence halls, obviously that's going to have an impact on the type of outcome for the case. We also check to see if they have a previous disciplinary record. So as I mentioned earlier with academic dishonesty as an example, if a student has engaged in academic dishonesty one time, that's a different outcome than if they've done it before. It's also going to make a difference of whether this is happening in a doctoral program, in a master's program, things like that. And we're always looking at the safety of the individual student and the campus community. When I said earlier, if it happens or if it's available and it happens at SDSU. Unfortunately, I've worked with many students who have made threats to the campus, threatened to shoot up residence halls, threatened to murder individual students, honor killings, the threat of honor killings, academic dishonesty, sexual assault. So a lot goes into the work that we're doing with students. And part of our role is also to make sure that in addition to looking at what's the appropriate consequence for the student, that we're doing our best to ensure the safety of the campus community. And if you didn't know about some of those issues that I just mentioned, I think that means that we're doing our job. Because in addition, we're also getting the support that we need for those students that are facing a crisis that may be leading to some of these behaviors. And then finally, I just wanted to share again, I think what we don't necessarily hear about a lot is what can come out for the student of our individual process. And these are all quotes taken from, we use reflection essays a lot. A lot of times we'll have a sort of a counseling requirement and then a reflection essay. What I think is important to note is I think just by the nature of what we do as judicial officers, if a student doesn't like something, they're going to tell us. They're going to tell us if they think it's a waste of their time, if it was a waste of their money, anything like that. But I also wanted to show you each of these bullet points is a quote from a different student essay. And it really shows that by going through a process that they didn't want to go through, that they hated, good things can come out of that process. And I think it's important when we're talking to our faculty and things like that, those folks that are mandated but are hesitant to refer, the conduct process can make a big difference and have an impact in students' lives. And to be honest with you, I was able to pull this together really quickly. I did not have to go digging to see what are the 5 people that ever wrote anything positive in their reflection essays. And I think this one is really interesting, right? I literally took this right from a student essay. Because of groupthink, cognitive dissonance plagued our minds. It takes a lot to act differently than what you believe. We drank and smoked, even though we knew at those quantities and rates, it was in no way healthy or safe for us. To justify the dissonance, we called it socializing. We hazed and consented to being hazed, even though we knew every time we punished one another, we were losing our humanity. To justify this dissonance, we call it education. We told each other to be silent and keep our brothers in line, even though we knew the cost of that silence was enormous and we were protecting no one. To justify the dissonance, we called it leadership. This can be the outcome of a student conduct proceeding.